What's good, everybody?
As per usual, I'm Jędrek, and today I'm here to share with you my initial MH2 impressions as of its motto release day. Today's video will be divided in 3 parts. I'm gonna start by briefly mentioning any cards that got spoiled yesterday, as they didn't make a cut for my last daily write-up, and that are worth looking for as far as modern goes. Then I'm gonna walk you through my top 10 cards from MH2 for the format, and then finally I'm gonna share with you 5 lists that I'm most eager to try as soon as I can get my hands on those new shiny toys. Well, that's quite a lot to go through, so without any further ado, let's jump right into it. Similarly to other sets, the last batch of MH2 cards contained mostly cards intended for limited, and as much as I adored MH1 drafts and I'm very excited for MH2 limited, the topic of this video is modern, and I'm gonna focus on those cards that might have some time in the spotlight of modern. And truth be told, there is not much to discuss in general in the last day of spoilers. Only 3 new cards piqued my interest by enough to warrant talking about them, and I'm gonna start from the least interesting / powerful and scale up from that. So, first of all, let's talk about Sojourner's Companion. I wanted to mention it briefly because I'm somewhat annoyed that WotC gave us hopes for an actual factual affinity deck in Modern, and then they printed a strictly better Mirror Enforcer. I can bet that there's definitely some amount of nostalgia in the community for affinity decks of yore, and many fond memories of casting Frogmites and Enforcers for 0 mana, and now they'll have to switch for some random Salamander, assuming they are even interested in a 7 mana for 4 affinity creatures. And to sum this one up, it's very sad times. Okay, next up, we've got Unholy Hit. It's a single red mana to deal 2 damage to target creature or planeswalker that upgrades to 6 damage on Delirium. 6 damage for 1 mana is an insane rate, and the fail case of shock that can't go upstairs isn't that bad in most mid-range and control decks. It's obviously unacceptable in like red aggressive decks that are interested in burning your opponent out, but in the slower decks that can give up this opportunity, this option of going face, it's probably okayish. So the biggest problem I have with this card is that it will be hard to find a non-black, non-white red deck that can turn on Delirium somewhat reliably and is interested in a burn spell that can't be pointed at the opponent. That basically limits us to stuff like blue-red Ponza, or green-red Ponza, obviously, that previously played Flame Slash, or blue-red Control, and neither of those decks are great at this whole Delirium business. So overall, Unholy Hit strikes me as a decent card without a decent home. Finally, we have Resurgent Belief, aka the new Replenish, which is the last and quite possibly best installment of MH2 Null CMC cycle, alongside Inevitable Betrayal, Profane Tutor, Glimpse of Tomorrow, and Gaia's Will. So, Resurgent Belief has Suspend 2 for 2 mana, including 1 white, and it returns all enchantments from your graveyard to the battlefield. My interest in this card is twofold. First of all, it can be paired with the Enchantress cards that we've got in the set, as to serve as a powerful rebuilding tool in case you got wrapped with something like Return to Nature, or maybe that just you're playing against a control deck who dealt with a bunch of your enchantments and you need this powerful reset button to have your stuff on the battlefield once again. Second use for this card, and the one I'm much more interested in, is as the part of the blue-white X control shell that cycles stuff like Lake Claim, Shark Typhoon, and Cast Down, or Cast Out rather, and then cheats them from the graveyard as early as turn 4. After Ikoria got released, there was this kind of blue-white replenish deck in Legacy that was doing basically just that, and even though it wasn't very good, it was certainly sweet. It might be a bit too short on quality enchantments that cycle and just put themselves into graveyard, because we are basically limited to those 3. But I, for one, will surely try to make the best out of this deck, because, as I said before, it sounds very sweet. So basically, This concludes the cards that were spoiled yesterday that I wanted to talk about, and now let's jump into the goods, aka top 10 cards from Modern Horizons 2. Honestly, this was one of the hardest, if not the hardest, lists that I ever compiled. There's just so many good cards in this set. And maybe we don't have any Hogak level nonsense, but there's a lot of decent to very good additions to archetypes that were previously unplayable or close to it. So this kind of power level distribution is much more up to my alley than the spiky one that we've got in MH1, and I'm really glad with how MH2 turned out. Like power level wise, it's very flat compared to MH1, so big ups for that, Wizards. So first of all, I've got an honorable mention, as there is no way this card makes the top 10 list, and it's Riptide Laboratory. You guessed it right. It's not super flashy or anything, but rebuying Snapcaster Mages and Spellstutter Sprites is all I want to do right now, and I can guarantee you I will put one copy of this wonderful land in every Wizards containing deck till the end of time. And to be honest, I probably lose to it being a colorless land a fair amount, but I will have no regrets at all. So, moving on to the actual list, number 10 is Dragon's Rage Channeler. It's a single red mana for a 1/1 human shaman that surveils 1 whenever you cast a non-creature spells, and gets +2/+2 flying and has to attack each turn if you have Delirium. So the promise of a 3-power flying 1-drop is very well known to Magic players thanks to Delver of Secrets, almost as well as the fact that Delver hasn't been really playable card in Modern for at least since the Gitaxian Pro ban. I doubt that Dragon's Rage Channeler will follow Delver footsteps, although I can see them team up from time to time. And that's mostly because it slots in an already proven and existing archetype, Death's Shadow, be it red, black, or giant. Those decks are already interested in some odd types thanks to stuff like Tarmogoyf and Mishra's Bubble to recur with Lurus. And they have a fairly good spread of creatures, instant sorceries, backed by a handful of fetch lands that just go to the graveyard on their own, and all of that combined can ensure getting DRC online early and often, and a 3 mana beater for 1 mana is all those decks want, really. So the next 3 cards on my list share the same trait. They are very, very powerful on raid, and could easily be higher on the list, but they either don't slot well in any existing decks due to their requirements, or they match poorly against the currently popular interaction spells. So at number 9, we've got Dam, which is by far the best sweeper in the history of Magic if you can support double black on turn 2 and double white on turn 4. So the issue with it is that the most successful black-white deck before MH2 was Esperka, and Esperka runs some very demanding blue costs between Archmage's Charm, Cryptic Command, and now Counterspell, and can't really accommodate those strict mana requirements that Dam has. It's somewhat possible that the allure of a Terminate Wrath of God split card is strong enough to risk getting color screwed from time to time, but I'm not 100% on that. What I'm sure about is that any straight black-white deck will absolutely love them, and I expect it to see play even if it's not in Esper. Next up, we've got Ragavan, Nimble Pilferer at number 8. For a measly price of 1 red mana, you get a 2/1 Monkey Pirate with a dash for 1 and the red, and the ability, whenever it deals combat damage to a player, create a treasure token and exile the top card of that player's library. Until end of turn, you may cast this card. This one has a lot of stuff going on, and it's probably one of the most pushed 1-drops ever. Like, it's right up there with like Deathrite Shaman and stuff, I think. Not in terms of power level, maybe, because Deathrite Shaman is obviously insanely strong, but the amount of text and stuff that this 1-drop can do is somewhat similar to the amount of stuff that was going on with Shaman on the face value, basically. So the biggest concern with Ragavan in Modern is the ubiquity of Lava Dart and to a lesser extent Renin 6. And because of those issues, I doubt it'll find home in like Burn and Blue-Red Prowess, but there are certainly some decks that will welcome this little monkey with open hands. The most obvious one for me is Obosh, as it can greatly benefit from accelerating cards like Seasoned Pyromancer and Blood Moon and has a decent number of chip removal spells that can clear any potential blockers. So what's interesting about mono red Obosh is, well, obviously you can't play green for dorks because you're, well, mono red. So getting a mana ramp that's also a decent creature in mono red is something that we haven't really have in modern before, and I think that once again Obosh will greatly benefit from Ragavan. Another home for the monkey is Ponza, which, just like Obosh, is interested in playing stuff that costs 3 mana as soon as possible, and definitely it won't dethrone the dynamic duo of Arbor Elf and Utopia Sprawl, which already cemented themselves as the most powerful mana acceleration in the format, but there's a chance it will replace the singleton Birds of Paradise that you play from time to time, or any other odd cards in your deck like this. Finally, since it's also a pirate, it slots right into the all-powerful Pirate Stompy. Well, obviously it doesn't slot into Pirate Stompy because that's not a deck, but in all seriousness, there is another potential place for Ragavan to shine, in my opinion. And that's as a sideboard pivot for slower red decks against other slow decks. For example, imagine you are playing Blue-White Control against Red-Green Scapeshift or Fruit Breach, and your opponent is playing this Ragavan on turn 1 before you even make your first land drop, and your hand is full of Dispels and Counterspell and other stuff that are good against those like combo-y big spells. So, and you are just left completely hopeless against the snowballing monkey. And this kind of strategy obviously gets much worse once it's known, but I have a feeling that some people will greatly benefit from it early in the format. Okay, moving on to number 7 on the list is the white representative of the incarnation cycle, Solitude. It's a 3/2 flashy lifelinker for 5 mana, including 2 white, and it has an evoke cost of exiling white cards from your hand, and when it enters the battlefield, you exile up to 1 target creature, and then the exiled creature controller gains life equal to its power. So it's basically ETB Swords to Plowshares. The biggest obstacle for Solitude is finding enough white cards to have something to pitch early on, unless you are playing a mono-white deck. Well, despite its drawback, I could see the world in which Blue-White Control wants to find a way to accommodate Solitude, because let's be honest, white removal sucks. Like, I mean, Oust and Prismatic Ending are serviceable at killing small things, but they are both sorceries, and just don't get me started on puffing stuff on turn 1, like, it's not the winning strategy. Blue Mages aside, though, I think Solitude will slot right in white-based Aether Vial decks. So, for example, Soul Herder or Defend Taxes, stuff like this, and it might even single-handedly bring Squadron Hawk back as a playable card in Modern, because if you are playing Defend Taxes, well, let's agree that Leonine Arbiter hasn't been really good in many years now, and now with Solitude you can play both Stormforge Mystic and Squadron Hawk, which is very good, and it's been very good at holding equipments for over 10 years now, going back to 2010 Coldblade deck in Standard. So you get both a body for your equipment and additional cards you can pitch to Solitude. So I think if there was ever a day for, or a time for Squadron Hawk to shine in Modern, it's right now with Solitude. Rounding out the bottom half of the list, at number 6, we've got Ignoble Hierarch. It's a single green mana for a 0/1 with an Exalted that can tap to add black, red, or green. So Noble Hierarch has been the fixture of Modern and other competitive formats ever since it got printed, and I expect no less from its less virtuous cousin. Not much else to say about it, aside from listing maybe some decks that it might slot right in, or even help to make viable. So stuff like Ponza, once again, instead of this one Birds of Paradise if you don't want to play Ragavan. Domain Zoo, Yawgmoth, Shamans, Black-Green Infect, just to name a few. And well, it's hard to get more iconic than Noble Hierarch, but our number 5 on this list does that with ease. Many words have been spoken and written about it, and I've added a fair bit of them myself, so without adding any unnecessary time to an already lengthy video.
It's comfortable.
Number 4 goes to Solitude's nefarious relative, Grief. Just like all the other incarnations, you can pitch a card that shares the color with it, in this case black, to evoke it. Aside from that, it's a 3/2 menace for 4 mana, including 2 black, and when it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals their hand, and you get to... Wait a second. And you get to choose a non-land card from it that they will have to discard. Old school players might recognize Griff as an unmask in disguise, but it's so much more than that. I'm not gonna dive into how absurd it will be in like Legacy and especially Vintage with Bazaar and Vengevines, as other people have a lot more credibility than me when it comes to those formats. Instead, I'm gonna try to predict how good it will be in Modern, and my prediction borders between good and great. There has been a lot of chatter about pairing it with Ephemerate, but personally, I don't buy it. It's hard to build a deck with enough black cards and good blink targets, since besides Griff, the only good one is basically Tide Hollow Scalar, and I'm much higher on pairing it with various black effects that bring it back on the cheap, with the best of them being Malakir Rebirth, as it can also double as a mana source if needed. Because black mid-range decks are monopolized by lures these days, I expect Griff to show up mostly in black-based combo decks, such as Reanimator, and maybe some sort of white-blue, or white-black rather, Stoneforge Mystic deck, as Batterskull and Swords already disqualifies lures as a viable companion in those decks. And now we are getting to creme de la creme, the absolute best cards in the set. On the lowest step of the podium, proudly wielding its bronze medal, is Murktide Regent. For 7 mana, wink wink, including 2 blue, we've got a free flyer with Delve that enters the battlefield with a +1/+1 counter for each instant or sorcery delved away for it, and it grows larger every time instant or sorcery leaves the graveyard, which is definitely a nice bonus alongside subsequent copies of itself and Snapcaster Mages. And honestly, it's ironic for how long blue players were clamoring for an on-color version of Tarmogoyf, only to get something that's clearly so much better than the actual Goyf. Sure, it won't always be able to come down on turn 2, but it has flying, it can be pushed, it can be bolted most of the time, and it can be pitched to any blue pitch spells. With significant printings in MH2, there's a deck I'm really excited about utilizing Murktide Regent, and I will get right up to it after we are done with this list. At number 2, we've got, in my opinion, the best incarnations, Subtlety. It's 4 mana, including 2 blue, or 1 blue card to pitch for Evoke, as always, for a free flyer with Flash and the ability. When Subtlety enters the battlefield, choose up to 1 target creature spell or Planeswalker spell. Its owner puts it on top or bottom of their library. Even though I don't think we'll see 4 copies in most decks that will run it, it's still an extremely impactful printing that complements Force of Negation insanely well. My first draft of Esperka post MH2 runs 1 of each in the main deck, with the second copies of both hiding in the board, and that's probably on the low side of things, to be honest. Tapping out with Jace for Jace or Teferi while holding Force of Negation has been such a big deal for years now, and with Subtlety you can do this regardless of what your opponent is doing. The problem with it was that, okay, so we want to slam Jace with Force of Negation, but they are playing Primeval Titan. Well, now you have Subtlety that even dodges Cavern of Soul, and that's honestly just an icing on the already sublime cake, which Subtlety is. Okay, finally, we are at number 1, the Robbie Rotten of MH2, so to speak. We've covered a lot of great cards already, but there is one last piece of cardboard ahead of us. One that puts 3 spells, pushed 1-drops, and iconic reprints to shame. I'm obviously talking about Dotty Voidwalker. For 2 black mana is a 3/2 Dotty Rogue with Shadow and 2 cracked abilities. First one is the replacement effect known from Leyline of the Void, with a little twist to it. Whenever a card would be put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, instead exile it with a Void counter on it. What's this Void counter, you ask? Let me explain it by reading the second ability. Well, I guess third ability if we count Shadow. You can tap and sacrifice Dotty Voidwalker to choose an exiled card an opponent owns with a Void counter on it, and then cast it this turn, without paying its mana cost. Like, why without paying for it? Like, it's so mind-boggling to me. It would be good even if you had to pay for the card. Now it's bonkers. You can even choose cards exiled with any previous copies of Voidwalker, or the same one after you replay it with Lurus, once you actually cast it in once. So imagine going Voidwalker on turn 2 into Footsie, discarding stuff like Ulamog, Primetime, Karm Liberated, or even something as measly as Jace the Mind Sculptor or Omnath Locus of Creation, and just using Voidwalker to cast it outright. How are you even dealing with this? This card is outrageously powerful, and on top of that, it has another outrageously annoying quality. It's a rogue that clashes with the whole identity of profiting from stacked graveyard that other rogues and Eldraine cards that see play alongside rogues like Into the Story and Drown in the Loch share. All I wanted from MH2 for rogues was another good one, or 2 drops maybe, and I guess I got it. You did me dirty with that one, Andrew Brown. You did me dirty. So, to sum up, we have on number 10, Dragon Rage's Channeler. On number 9, we have Dem. Number 8 is Ragavan. Number 7, Solitude. Number 6, Ignoble Hierarch. Number 5,
Counterspell.
Number 4, Grief. Number 3, Murktide Regent. Number 2, Subtlety. And number 1, the best card, in my opinion, from MH2 for Modern is Dottie Voidwalker. So let's then proceed to the last segment of this video, some MH2 Brews. Okay, as I've said earlier, I've got 5 lists from you. I'm gonna start with the one that I'm most excited about, and then I'll move to the rest of them in no particular order, because there's one that I already kinda teased, that I'm really into, and I hope it's a good deck. And it's Mono Blue Control. So, as you can hopefully right now see on your screen, if I do the post editing well enough, you've got some creatures in here. You've got 3 Subcaster Mages, and then 4 Subtleties and 4 Murktide Regents. To top of your threats, you have 2 Jaces, the Mind Sculptors, and, well, 1 Vedalken Shackles, if you consider that a threat. And then you have a bevy of counter magic and 2 Spell Snares, 4
Counterspells.
4 Archmage's Charms, 2 Forces of Negations, and 4 Cryptic Commands, as well as 4 Thought Scours to enable Murktide Regent, and 3 copies of Suspend that will be used to slow your opponents down for a measly price of 1 blue mana. So obviously, Suspend is not the best removal spell of all time, definitely, but it's a card that is by far the best option you've got in mono blue, and I think that with this amount of counter magic, just slowing something down by 2 turns might be enough to, for example, get Vedalken Shackles online, or getting Jace online and just dealing with it later on. On top of that, you've got
a pristine mana base
with 2 Castle Vanches, 5 fetch lands. You can probably play more fetch lands than 5, but I don't want to overboard on fetch lands. And 5 fetch lands were nice because I could just add 1 of each plus Prismatic Vista, and it looks very cool. But yeah, once again, you can probably play like 6 or 7 fetch lands. I wouldn't go past that, I think, because one of the allures of playing monocolor is that you are taking very, very little mana damage from your mana base. Then you have 1 Minamo School of Water at Water's Edge, which will untap an occasional Click or Teferi Mage of Zalfir from the sideboard if you run any of those cards. 1 Riptide Laboratory, which will be, well, as I mentioned before, mandatory for me these days, and everything is rounded out by 14 islands. So as you can see, there's no sideboard in this deck so far, because honestly I don't know how to build it without having any context. In my first draft I will probably have, a bunch of dispels, some more forces, maybe the Mystical Dispute, Click, maybe the aforementioned Teferi Mage of Zalfir. Maybe I will cut 1 island for 1 copy of Cavern of Souls to get this Teferi in there without any problems. Probably some Brazen Borrowers, just an overall bunch of good blue cards. Okay, so this was Mono Blue Control. As I've said, the deck that I was most excited about. So now we're going to the rest of them. And the first is a player that you might know from Modern, because it was dominating Modern for quite some time, right around 2018-2019, and it's Blue Red Phoenix right now on your screen. What made Blue Red Phoenix a maybe worthy contender in the format? Well, the card that was mostly used to ridicule Sodek for not getting a decent discard effect, Faithless Salvaging. Faithless Salvaging is a 1 and a red, so 2 mana, for an instant to discard a card, then draw a card, and it has rebound. So, although it's not nearly as powerful as Faithless Looting, its biggest strength is that you are getting a free cast, well, not trigger, but it counts toward your Phoenix for free on turn 3. So the pattern is that on turn 1 you play your cantrip, on turn 2 you play the Faithless Salvaging, and then on turn 3 you get a rebound, and then you need to only cast 2 more spells, and if those spells are instants, you can even do that in response to salvaging, to maybe dig for your phoenixes deeper, and then your birds will just fly right out of the gates very happily, as they used to in early 2019. And also it's worth noting that Thing in the Eyes benefits twice from Faithless Salvaging, so that's pretty nice. And aside from that, that's just everything you know in Phoenix decks, so some Lightning Axes, Bolts, Opts, Serum Visions, Slides, Thought Scours, on top of 2 copies of Expressive Iteration, which might be pretty good in the deck. I don't know yet, but it was the card that's proven itself to be really good in Blue-Red Prowess. So I thought, well, I might as well try it. To run the things out, you have 2 copies of Finale of Promise, which is a pretty nice way to bring Phoenixes back with 1 card. 2 copies of Izzet Charm to supplement Faithless Salvaging, because without looting you don't have that many discard outlets, and 4 copies of the Notorious Manamorphose that you know and love so well, or maybe don't love. Depends on who you are and what kinds of decks you like. Okay, so moving forward, we have a deck that was popularized by Aspiring Spike a couple of months ago, which is a spin on a deck that I've played a lot when Lurus wasn't nerfed, and that's blue-black Lurus, or in this case, blue-black-green Lurus. So I think I can say with confidence that I'm a person in the world that, if not on the first place, then definitely in the conversation for a person who played Lurus with blue cards in Modern the most. Honestly, I've played so much with those decks, and I really, really like them. And Counterspell will be a great boon for these decks, because Counterspell obviously will be good in any deck that previously played like Mana Leak and Logic Knot, but especially in a deck like Lurus, because if you are playing a more traditional Planeswalker shell, you can just you can just reach this point of no return quite easily, in which it doesn't matter what your opponent will do, because your Teferi is worth, like, essentially, I don't know, 10 cards or whatever, because you drew 5 cards with it. They have to spend a lot of resources to kill it, and if they don't, you will win the game with it. So it's worth a lot of cards, and it doesn't matter if one of your cards that you draw was like a dead Mana Leak. Sometimes it will matter, but not that often. And if you look at Lurus, you can't really play expensive Planeswalkers with Lurus. Well, you can play Valky, we'll go into it later. But for the most part, the way in which you are getting card advantage in Lurus is by replaying Bobble turn after turn after turn, and you're basically drawing 2 cards compared to your opponent's 1 card. And in this scenario, you really need your interaction to be mana efficient and good later into the game. So you couldn't really afford to top deck a dead Mana Leak later into the game, and now you can top deck Counterspell instead, which is one of the best cards you can draw later into the game. So this is the list right now on your screen. And as far as new cards go, I have 4 Counterspells, I have 2 copies of Seal of Removal, which seems like a pretty great card with Lurus. Because for 1 mana, it's an enchantment for 1 mana that you can sacrifice to return target creature to its owner hand, so it's basically unsummon on an enchantment. And it serves 2 roles. It's obviously very good at bouncing your opponent's creatures, and can get pretty oppressive with Lurus. And it's a way to protect your Lurus. So, for example, you're playing against a control deck that doesn't have creature you want to bounce, but you can just bounce your Lurus and prevent them from killing it. And then you can replay Lurus and replay Seal of Removal. So it's pretty innocuous, but very nice pickup for the deck, I think. And finally, the last new card in the deck is Abandoned Harvest, which is the card that I'm definitely least certain about. Or, well, I'm not even certain. I have least hopes in Abandoned Harvest. So the card that's very good in Legacy. It's proven itself to be quite nice alongside stuff like Brainstorm, mostly because you can clear the bad Brainstorm with it after you cast it, or like Ponder or whatever. But there's a thing that Abandoned Harvest is pretty great at, and it's reducing number of lands in your deck. Because usually the rule is that for every 4 cantrips you can cut 2 lands from your deck, and I think for Abandoned Harvest you can cut 3 or maybe even 4 lands, because it always will give you a land if you need land, just because how it works. For those of you who don't know, Abandoned Harvest is single green mana for a sorcery, and you are choosing either land or non-land, and you are revealing cards from the top of your library until you get to the chosen type. You put this card into your hand, and then rest of the cards on the bottom of your library in a random order. So I just wonder if there's a good place for Abandoned Harvest in this format. I think it's pretty okay with Lurus. You got Snapcaster to flash it back later on. You can cuddle lands, which is nice. I also think that Abandoned Harvest might be what Delver decks needed to just cut to some ridiculous amount of lands, like, I don't know, like 16 or maybe even 15. And I will definitely play them as well, even though I don't have as high hopes for them as I have for this Bug Lurus deck. Okay, next up, moving forward, the second to last deck, and the only deck that I've built that does not run a single blue card. It's my take on the ubiquitous Arbor Elf Utopia Sprawl engine, including the newest 4-drop from Modern Horizons 2, or maybe the oldest 4-drop from Modern Horizons 2 as it's reprinted, originally from Odyssey, I want to say. It's black, green braids, right now on your screens. So it takes a page from Ponza's playbook. You're playing 4 braids and 4 Karn the Great Creator that can be cast on turn 2 off of Arbor Elf and Utopia Sprawl. And let me say that Braids Cabal Minion on turn 2 seems pretty damn strong. Like, imagine you're playing against an opponent that played taplands on turn 1, like Valakut or Kalni Garden, or well, Kalni Garden is pretty good against it, but Valakut, Tolaria West, maybe Urza's Tower without any other play, Celestial Colonnade, my favorite card in Modern, something like this. And the opponent just goes turn 2 Braids, you need to sacrifice your land, and you didn't have a removal spell for Dork, so it's fairly unlikely you have a removal spell for Braids. And if you don't top deck it, they will just eat another land next turn, so it's very hard to come back from if it lands on turn 2. And although the rest of the deck is kinda like, the supporting cast is kinda suspicious, I've had some Life from the Loam and Bloodgust to break the synergy or symmetry of Braids. I've got Liliana of the Veil because it's pretty good on turn 2, and then some usual suspects in Fatal Push and the Inquisition of Kozilek, as well as Explore to have 10 acceleration spells, because Braids will probably be mediocre on turn 4, pretty good on turn 3, and backbreaking on turn 2 rather. So this one has sideboard because I needed to build a sideboard for Karn the Great Creator. This one was built before Zuranor got spoiled. Maybe I want Zuranor in this deck, especially with Life from the Loam. Well, I definitely want Zuranor in this sideboard, so there will be one. And the nice thing about this deck is that it has one card that's exclusive to Modern Horizons 2, because Brace is a reprint, and this card is Yavimaya, Cradle of Growth, also known as Greenborg. So this deck will be very, very easy to rent very early into the format, and I can just play it on tomorrow's stream. Because, well, okay, so let's talk about it. If you didn't know, tomorrow, Friday, the 4th of June, I'm gonna do a 12-hour stream. I'm gonna play from 1 p.m. European, which is I think 1 p.m. GMT plus 2. Not sure about it, but I think it's GMT plus 2. It's either plus 2 or plus 1. It's definitely 7 a.m. East Coast, and I will end on 1 a.m. European, and I'm gonna try a bunch of different decks with Modern Horizons 2 cards. I would love to play a mono blue deck, but getting 4 Markside Regents and 4 Subtleties so early might be very tough. So I will probably try to play stuff like Baglurus, because Baglurus gets doesn't get anything super hard to acquire from the set. Braids, I might play Esperka if I get my hands on 1 or 2 copies of Subtleties, and like 1 Prismatic Strands, not too many new cards. I might play Phoenix. We'll see. We'll see what we can get. So moving on to Esperka, because I already mentioned it. This is my first take on Esperka post Modern Horizons 2. Loading right up on your screens. Okay. So as you can see, there's not much new things going on. I want to try some cards. Obviously, there's a mandatory Riptide Laboratory in it, and there is 1 copy of Subtlety split with the Force of Negation, as I've mentioned before, with another Subtlety and another Force of Negation in the sideboard. As you can see, there are no Dems in my sideboard. I think I'm gonna try to stick to Damnation. If I see that people are playing them with no mana problems or small mana problems, then maybe I will try it as well, but my initial reaction is that I'm pretty suspicious as if it will be viable. And I have 1 copy of Prismatic Ending in the sideboard as another way to combat early creatures, as well as a singleton Sudden Edict in the main deck in place of the second Go for the Throat I used to run. So Sudden Edict is basically 1 and a black for an instant with split second, and it says target player sacrifices a creature. So why I want to play this card? Because split second is fucking cracked. Sorry for excuse my French, but sudden or split second is one of the most broken. Maybe broken is not the right word. Of the strongest, maybe, keywords that we got in Magic, because it means that this card can be countered. This card, aside from Chalice of the Void and stuff like this can be responded to with Veil of Summer, or with making another creature, either by casting some spells that generates token, or flashing a Snapcaster Mage, or cracking a fetch land for Dryad Arbor, or animating your manland, or what have you. So this card is an uncounterable removal spell for 2 mana against Prowess, because usually they beat you by countering your interaction with like this spell and stuff. And it's a card that's insanely good against Through the Breach, because if you can just keep their board clear of stuff like Snapcaster Mage, If they cast through the breach, you may let that resolve, you may let them move to their turn, and then you may even go to beginning of combat. And you can sudden edict their Emrakul, the Aeon Storm. They used 2 cards on it because they used Through the Breach and Emrakul. They can't respond with Snapcaster Mage, they can't counter it, they can't do anything about it. So that's pretty nice. And then of course I have 4 counter spells because, well, it's kind of fun. Another thing to note is 2 copies of Spellsnare instead of regular 1, because there is a bunch of 2 mana spells that I think will be quite playable, aside from Counterspell and like Control Mirrors. There's a bunch of good cards like Dottie, Voidwalker, there's Persist / Unmarked Grave in the Reanimator decks. So definitely a bunch of powerful 2-drops entering the format, so I'd rather be safe than sorry. Alright. Also, there are some other decks that I'm really excited about, like Mono Blue Architect that I've played about with Fairies, Affinity, Vengevine, Enchantress, and much more. But I wasn't sure on how to build them exactly, so I don't have a 60 or 72 for you, or 75 for you to present just now. Okay, so that's a wrap, folks. It's all. I know this video has been lengthy. I don't know how long it will actually be after I glue everything together and edit it, but my guess will be around, I don't know, 55, maybe 40 minutes, and we'll see how right or how wrong I am with this prediction. Nonetheless, I really want to thank you for watching it, if you made it till the end, and let me know what do you think about this sort of content, either on Discord or on YouTube or what have you. And I'm gonna see you tomorrow if you are watching this video on its premiere for a 12-hour stream. If you are watching it anytime else than on the premiere, you can go to my Twitch. My Twitch channel is in the description, and you can follow me there and catch me live when I'm playing more Magic. You can also go to my Patreon page, which is also in the description, and my Twitter page. You can follow me here or there to get updates and maybe support me to help me keep making those videos coming. That's all. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and bye bye.